he's been Anakin Skywalker less than Matt Latner has.
That's
so
true.
like he goes in and does all the homework and takes that Clone Wars Anakin plus his own version. It's another non-episodic release week of the podcast, which means we kind of have free range to do whatever we want to do, as if we're constrained by anything besides what we want to do. But this week, we're going to fanboy over Anakin's return in Ahsoka, which personally, now I'm not saying it's the best of Star Wars or anything, or the best since Disney has taken over, but to me it's the best. Like, it's my personal favorite. So I'm really excited about this.
Yeah, it just as a Star Wars fan, it was a big moment, right? Like, whether you like the story or not, which we did, but just having Hayden Christensen come back was such a big thing. And so
yeah, for sure.
It's a big moment.
It's so cool that it even happened. I mean, I don't think anyone thought it. So what we're going to do today, last week we talked the Mando season 2 finale and starting this kind of best of TV series thing we're doing until Andor comes out. But I think we're going to trim that down a little bit. Last week we talked about the whole episode, which there was quite a bit in that episode. This week we're just essentially going to go 30 minutes on Anakin Skywalker in The World Between Worlds. So that's what we're going to do. We'll share some clips from that. We'll talk about the Clone Wars Anakin. We'll talk about, this kind of the World Between Worlds Anakin and maybe some conjecture there. Should be a lot of fun. So this episode, just kind of doing a little bit of backstory. If you've never seen Ahsoka, but you're just super interested in Anakin and you're watching, what happened was Ahsoka just got beat by Baylan Skoll. The bad guys won. He knocks her off this ledge of, what's the planet called where they're fighting at? Do you remember?
Is it Cetos or something?
Yeah, that sounds correct.
I think that's right.
That sounds correct. Yeah. So they're fighting there, knocks her into the water, and then at the end of the episode, she wakes up in the World Between Worlds, and Anakin's talking to her, which, you talk about a week in between those two. I mean, that was like a golden week for Star Wars videos on YouTube, Star Wars on Reddit, comments on Instagram. That's all anyone was talking about that week. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, not only like the next episode, it doesn't even start you back there. Like, they still make you wait when they bring the episode back. It's like Hera and the Ghost and Hu Yang, and you're like, all right, come on, we gotta get to the World Between Worlds. They made you wait for it. But
yeah, that was kind of cruel what they did. It was a good 3-4 minutes till they actually got there.
Yeah, it was.
More than that.
Solid. It was definitely more than that. Because they come 6 minutes. They realize they're gone, and then you have the scene with Jason, and it was a good chunk of time that you're just waiting.
Yep, they did the flashback, they did the scene with Jason, Hu Yang, all that, and then right around the 6-minute mark, they jump into the World Between Worlds, which is quite the teaser, really, especially considering you knew this was going to be a big episode because they put it back in theaters in certain places. Like, you could go to Disney Springs and watch it in theaters. There's a place in South Florida you could go that just kind of spread out around the country. But in Florida, that was the 2 places you could do that at. So can you imagine like going to theaters, standing in line, and then you're waiting 6 whole minutes for Anakin to show up? That would be crazy too.
Yeah.
So you pick up here and we are in the World Between Worlds. I love this little shot here as well. Just the 2 of them standing on that platform or whatever it is. We really don't understand. Just kind of staring at each other. How cool is that?
It's such a cool space. I mean, it looks, it's similar enough to what we see in Rebels, but it kind of has its own feel here. And I just love the nebulous nature of it. Like, we don't ever really know where Ahsoka is or what's real and what's not. And I one of the things about the show as we were watching it that sets it so apart from The Mandalorian is it really does kind of just embrace the mystery of things. Like, there's not a lot of solid answers for a lot of things in this show. But that's okay, because Star Wars, in a lot of ways, those original trilogies were built on a lot of mysteries that we didn't know about. And so I like the fact that this place is just so nebulous and we don't really understand what it is or how it works, but it's there. So it is a cool shot.
I agree. I was thinking about that too. I mean, because we talked The World Between Worlds up and down when this was coming out.
Yeah.
And I'm most to the point to where it's one of those things that you don't need to know everything about it, because I think once you do know everything about it, it becomes a lot less cool. So if it just stays this mysterious, we get it here and there sprinkled in, big appearances as it happens, kind of the same way you want Anakin Skywalker sprinkled into Star Wars, honestly. But if they just do it and you get so immersed in it, but then they never fully are like, hey, so this is how this works. It's so fun just not to know and to talk about it and conjecture about what it could mean. And I hope they never give us like a legitimate answer on what it is, like in writing or screen or anything, just because it's so fun to talk about.
Yeah, I agree. Honestly, that is one of the reasons I hate midichlorians. because I didn't feel like I needed an explanation for how the Force works, but they threw it in there anyway. I don't like it. That's my opinion. Neither here nor there. I like
that they're
now.
calling it M count now. It's like it's a cooler version of those.
It sounds better than midichlorians. Yeah.
What's the M count? Stat. Right. So we start off here, world between worlds, and you figure out, because if you remember, there was some talk whether this was actually Anakin or not, or if it was something else, and he starts talking, and you're like, okay, it's Anakin.
Yeah.
Anakin.
So yeah, is it Anakin? And he comes in.
It's a little late for that.
One is never too old to learn, Snips.
So that's when you know where this is going. She's talking like, he tells her you lost. And then they talk a little bit. She's like, "Hey, it's too late. I've already lost."
He says he's here to finish her training.
Yeah, the training. Yeah.
Yeah, and so he's right late. Back into to Master Padawan. Like he goes immediately to that relationship.
Yep. And as soon as he gives that it's never too late to learn, you know exactly where this episode is going to go, because all we've clamored for quite some time, if you're a Clone Wars fan, Ahsoka Tano fan, and then you figure out Anakin's coming back, well, are they going to get closure? Because they never got closure. They got the whole Twilight of the Apprentice deal in Rebels, but I mean, that's a leap to call that closure, like good closure.
That's more traumatic than it was closure.
on the Anakin Ahsoka thing. So as soon as he gives those lines, okay, we're in some capacity, we're going to get closure here. And so that was just a good wish list item checked off for Star Wars fans there. So let's go here to what the lesson actually is, because I mean, I don't think anyone expected this line.
Yeah.
I've heard that before.
Oh, I gotta go back. Wait, I don't want to get copyrighted. This is such a good lesson.
All right. What's the lesson, Master?
Live. Or die.
Man, that is so good. Like, okay, I've got a lesson for you. What is it? Live or die.
Which seems really aggressive on the front end.
That's so Anakin, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And as you go on, it makes more sense as to what he's talking about. But, for Ahsoka, that's probably pretty confusing at the moment that he ignites his lightsaber. He's like, we're going to fight now.
Yeah. And also, like, if your thing is live or die, and the person that you have to live or die against is the chosen one who turned into the greatest good guy and bad guy ever. I mean, absolutely vicious. And
a little intimidating.
Like, also, what the heck is he doing here? Like, what's the strength level here going on? I mean, she's probably got to be thinking, this is not the lesson I'm looking for at 40 something or whatever, whatever she is at this point.
Yeah, you can tell she's like super skeptical about what's going on right now, about him, about who he is, about this lesson she's supposed to learn. You got to think her mind is still on, trying to get back and what had happened. And
Sabine,
yeah. So this is not probably where her priority is, but it's going to have to be.
Also, looking at this version of Anakin, because there's a little bit of talk in here, but it really just turns into a lot of combat until it jumps into the flashback scenes.
Yeah.
But seeing this Anakin as in live action as a teacher in that form, I think that's a super interesting take that we didn't actually get to see. I mean, when we see Hayden Christensen as Anakin, he's not given the greatest lines. He's not always given the greatest, picturesque. What am I thinking? Like graphics and stuff, special effects, like things kind of look corny or they sound corny. And then here it's just like a very stoic. I mean, you can't call him a Jedi Master because he's not. But you get this Anakin that we don't actually see on screen, and he's mature, but he's still that aggressive kind of Clone Wars Anakin too, which I liked.
Yeah, and you do see, I feel like, shades of kind of that stoicism in the Clone Wars with like Matt Lanter's version of him. And he did such a good job of creating like a fleshed out character who was impulsive, but also was smart and also kind of saw things differently than the other Jedi, and definitely trained his Padawan a little bit differently. And Christensen really picked up a lot of that stuff really well with the mannerisms and the inflection, and it feels like Clone Wars Anakin. And they just did a really good job of bringing that to life from something that was previously animated only. I mean, I think they nailed both the portrayal and the visual of it. It was spot on.
Well, he did a lot of background work on that too.
Yeah.
Like he watched some of the stuff, and I want to say I read this. It was an article or either an interview with Hayden, or maybe even with Matt Lanter. But regardless, he thanked Matt Lanter for keeping Anakin Skywalker going, right? Keeping Star Wars alive while the Clone Wars was going on. So there's that level of mutual respect there. And he's not just this big Hollywood star, which I know he had retired off to his farm for a while, but he's not like this big gun coming in like, yeah, I'm Anakin Skywalker, I get to decide who he is. No, he really wants to understand the character, loves the character, and wants to bring, I mean, he's been Anakin Skywalker less than Matt Lanter has.
That's
so
true.
He goes in and does all the homework and takes that Clone Wars Anakin plus his own version and puts it into one, just in probably 15, 20 minutes of screen time. I think it's an excellent job what we actually saw on screen.
Yeah, I agree. For sure.
Now, what did you think of this little Easter egg here?
I won't fight you.
I've heard that before.
Yeah,
that is so good.
I think that's one of the things. Like, a lot of us were like, "Is this really Anakin? Is this something other than Anakin?" But there are things that begin to come out that Ahsoka wouldn't know, right? And so
only Anakin would.
Whatever this version of Anakin is, it is akin to Anakin was, and so I do love that callback because it does kind of tell us right there at the beginning, this really is Anakin in some way, in some form, whatever that means. We don't know. And so I did like that line. It was a cool callback to Return of the Jedi.
Return of the Jedi. Yeah, I think too. It's a callback in one sense, right? It's a big callback, but on the other side of things, it was a little bit of a foreshadowing too, because you get to learn. Okay, well, he's bringing up these things that happened while he was Vader, so he's bringing in everything into this training lesson, all of his life experiences. And so it kind of makes you wonder, are we going to get any other Vader references? And then, man, the last third of this,
it's good.
He is Vader, right? So, I mean, it's you get all of Anakin in this episode, and I think that's what we really like. So obviously, there's some really cool combat here between Anakin and Ahsoka. But it skips back and forth to Hera and Jason and kind of some New Republic stuff. But I really liked watching them fight on the little pedestal or platform or whatever you want to call it here. Yeah, I mean, again, we don't exactly know what it is, but they did pretty good with just how it looks and the choreography and stuff like that.
Looks like you don't have much left to offer.
I haven't taught you everything yet.
That's cool. She does. That was a pretty good kick that she does. I don't think any of us were expecting her to actually best him at any point.
No, I know.
And she didn't. But then you get that slash. That's a new thing for the World Between Worlds for us. And then, as we go forward, we see instead of going through portals, we're just falling into different flashback scenes.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see, as we talk about like who this Anakin is and what he is now. Like he obviously has some familiarity with how this place works. Like he knows what's going to happen when he does this and where it's going to lead. So I do think it's interesting that he's manipulating the World Between Worlds to an extent to his purposes, which is interesting. That he's not just there, but kind of understands it on some level.
I think we'll talk about this a little bit once we, especially like once we see how this wraps up in the World Between Worlds. Right. But the direction I think this is going, I think we're going to get more than just a little bit of Anakin in this Ahsoka story going forward.
So,
I think it's going to turn out, I think we're probably going to get more than just a little bit of the World Between Worlds too, because I think at some point we're going to learn that Anakin is kind of over this whole thing. I would not be surprised at all if that's kind of, they bring forth a new meaning of the Chosen One, if you will, because a lot of complaint goes into, well, he was a Chosen One, but then Rey comes and beats Palpatine and this, that, and other. So you do have that line where it's like maybe a prophecy misunderstood in Revenge of the Sith. It would not, or is that at the end of Attack of the Clones? Maybe that's the end of Attack of the Clones.
Yeah, it might be.
With Mace and Yoda and Obi-Wan. Yeah. But either way, like, what if Dave takes that line and then does that fine little dance around the sequels that, like, everything has to do almost, and comes up with, like, no, he is the Chosen One, and it's actually a lot bigger than any of us really thought. It goes just beyond this little good guy, bad guy thing, and it's this whole big force as a whole. I would like that. I think that would be a good explanation of what Anakin's doing there, how it all works together, and give us the meaning back for that Chosen One too. Bringing balance to the Force. That could be like the cosmic force, not just any situational force.
Yeah, because he kind of seems like maybe like a bridge between the two in some ways, because he clearly is able to glean some things outside, because he references her losing to Balin, right? Like he knows why she's there. But at the same time, we see later that he doesn't know everything she knows, and so it's not like he has access to everything, but he does seem to have some ability to know what's going on outside of the World Between Worlds, which is interesting.
Yeah, that's a good point, because he does very much. He's not like omniscient, right? That's the word I'm looking for. Yeah. Like he's not all knowing in here. He seems to be all powerful, maybe, but he's not all knowing in this World Between Worlds, which is, I guess if he's like the gatekeeper of it or the person over it all, maybe that does kind of throw a wrench in it, because you would think he would know everything. So I don't know. That's an interesting little thing there. Because when they're on, we'll get to it, but I guess when they're on Mandalore, he's like, I don't know what this is.
Yeah, he's like, I don't know this battle.
Yeah. Or either he's just kind of like fibbing. I don't know. You can always route that in, I guess. But this Anakin, honestly, I mean, seeing Anakin in the Revenge of the Sith robes and everything, that was cool. Something we never expected. But at the same time, I think this is very much an Anakin that we never expected here.
Master! Hurry up, Snips!
Also, young Ahsoka. That's a pretty cool thing as well.
They did a really good job. I like that they went the route that they did with this, because, Ahsoka, to shift off of Anakin for a second, Ahsoka has this hard exterior where she has to like play it cool. And so I think it was perfect to take her back to like being young and like super vulnerable and like super upset and like doesn't understand things. I think it was a really good way to reflect like what's really going on in Ahsoka, is that she has this confident exterior, but inside there's just so many questions and so many doubts and so many insecurities. So I love that they went that route, because I think it's a great depiction of what's going on the inside. And they did a great job doing that, I thought.
Yeah, I agree. I never, and I'm sure I'm not alone in this too, but as far as a Star Wars fan goes, because I've watched the Clone Wars, I'm not crazy about it. There's arcs I like, there's arcs I love that's really good, but like just sitting and watching it all, that's not something that I'm gonna do again.
That's fair.
It's just, yeah, it's not for me. But I don't think I fully got the whole like teen soldier thing in the Clone Wars, because it's hard to like when it's animated and you got this other Jedi thrown in there, and it's almost like Anakin's a little older than her, Obi-Wan's a little older than Anakin, and that's all you need to know. Well, here it's like, oh my gosh, I'm looking at a kid fighting in a war. And then at the same time, you're thinking like, oh my gosh, they've got this person who's supposed to be the chosen one, and he's got to train a kid in a war. Like that, it just kind of blew my mind, like the situation that I think maybe we don't quite get in the prequels of everything going on between episodes 2 and 3 with Anakin. Not that the Clone Wars, I mean, we didn't have all that in between back then either, but like if you see something like this between 2 and 3 and then you see Anakin fall, you're like, man, he went through some stuff over that 10 or how many 3 years of the Clone Wars.
Yeah. And I think too it's cool because this is obviously a younger version of Ahsoka, but it's with all the retrospect, right? Like the older Ahsoka being able to look back and have all these conflicts about what went down. And so you see her kind of talk about like what she was and how she was only a soldier and all the death that she saw. And it's not just young Ahsoka in the moment. This is Ahsoka also reflecting back. And so I think it's a really cool combination to where you can take her experience having to be this soldier, but also like still dealing with it in the future and like combining those into like this reflective period. I thought it was really cool.
Yeah, well, you got to look too, like that. Not only did they do an excellent job bringing Hayden back, but they also do an excellent job in bringing him back to support the story. So it is that Ahsoka reflecting back, but the whole story of Ahsoka is Ahsoka and Sabine. It's not the Ezra, it's not the Anakin. It's a little bit of the Ezra and a little bit of the Anakin and a little bit of the Hera. I wish there could have been more Chopper, but really this is all about Ahsoka and Sabine, that master and apprentice relationship. And so this whole scene with Anakin, obviously it's a master and apprentice thing, and he's gearing her up to be the master that she needs to be. So like not only are we getting that closure we want, but it's pushing Ahsoka's story forward, and that's how you want all these cameos to go too. Like you don't want it just to be there just because. When you get it and it matters, which happens here, I think that's when, you know, any show, movie, whatever is at its best.
Yeah. One of the things I like when they first drop into this place is Anakin doesn't seem fazed by it, which kind of makes me wonder if he's been through his own experiences there. Like if he's already gone through some of these moments in his past and like had to come to terms with it, because he's not like, man, what's going on? He's like, yep, it's the Clone Wars. That's where we are.
This is Ryloth, right? That's what this one is.
Yeah. So I kind of wonder if he's already been exposed to this a little bit.
That is interesting, right? Like if he's just hanging out there, like, and just kind of reliving everything, that would kind of be a miserable thing. But I guess if he's looking back at it through the way the story is written as far as Star Wars goes with the Force and everything else, maybe it's not a regretful thing. It's just the way things are.
I mean, you got to think as a character who finds redemption in the very, very last moments of his life. Yeah. Like if he does kind of come to a place where he still exists, like he probably has a lot of questions about his life and about what happened. And so, you know, I doubt that he just came out on the other side, like with complete peace and acceptance of who he was and what he did. That'd be a cool thing to explore is if we ever get how Anakin became where he is, not necessarily explaining what he is, but,
mentally,
I don't know. It would be interesting. Yeah, mentally.
Yeah. Well, it is interesting in that from a certain point of view, like it just shows how he becomes a Force ghost. Yeah. And you get like the little bit of like, oh, I've done so much bad and this, that, and the other. And Obi-Wan's Force ghost is the one bringing him out. And he's like, keep going. Like there's good, you know, it can't just end like this. And it's like, it's not just going to end like this. And so, a little bit more of a dive in that. I would be super interested in that as well. This was a really good line here. It was like very arrogant Anakin, but also it's teaching Ahsoka as well, talking about the, you know, having a Padawan's not all it's cracked up to be.
Yeah. Padawan? You know, teaching's not all it's cracked up to be.
Really? What makes you say that?
He says he's joking, but like,
shit like that.
I think, she didn't like it, but I do think it's a good little reminder of what you're trying to do with Sabine. It's not an easy thing, right? Like, he's just given all these lessons here and there because they're just bringing Sabine in as a means to an end. We've talked about this with Ahsoka, but they kind of use her to get her into the battle, and they're like, oh yeah, we're going to get Ezra and train her, whatever. But it's more than just having a Padawan. It's not all it's cracked up to be. And I like that Anakin is the one delivering that message to her.
Yeah, and I like that in this interaction before, you know, she's just talking about how much death there's been and how her decisions lead to pain for others. And Anakin's like, well, that's part of it, right? That's part of being a leader. And so we'll get into it more, but I like how they begin to kind of outline that Ahsoka's issue is just she's like kind of ruled by fear of a lot of things, which I think is really cool. But which is really cool because, I mean, that was Anakin's fall, right? It was he was controlled by his fear of what could happen and what he was trying to stop. And so what better person to help her with this issue than someone who fell to it? And, you know, he keeps giving this live or die thing. I mean, really, Anakin, through his actions, through choosing the dark side, like he chose death. Like he didn't, he quit fighting in a lot of ways. And gave into that fear. So like, what better person to guide her through this than this guy who that was what did him in, and he had to figure it out. I thought that was cool.
No, I like that. And now this shot here, potentially, if it weren't for a shot like 10 minutes later, could be the best shot in this episode.
Yeah, these are good.
These are the way it's so simple, super subtle. They just use the volume and, you know, other techniques. Wasn't like it was a $10 million shot, but it looks like a $10 million shot. That's so good. You love to see that, right?
I love it. It's because it's the thing they're not talking about, right? It's the thing that's right there on the edge of Ahsoka's mind.
Yep.
And they're not talking about it, but it's just this harsh, dissonant thing that just flashes like on her periphery. I love the way they did that because, you know, she's not willing to address it yet and he's not bringing it up, but it's there and like she can't get away from it. So I love just that flash and that harsh, dissonant sound that comes in because I feel like that's just where it sits in her mind.
The walk even changes too, like when it's so him marching in as Anakin and then it turns into that real stiff Vader walk. Oh, man, love to see that.
Yeah, they did a really good job with that.
Well, it kind of, to me, and I don't know if they were like getting at this, because I'm sure they weren't. Maybe they're just doing it and letting people like us think way too hard about it. But if you watch like the Clone Wars, it is just Anakin marching his way to Vader. That whole war is. And so in that one scene
That's
there,
a good point.
That is, you see Anakin marching his way into being Darth Vader, fighting in this war that was, you know, orchestrated essentially just for the fall of the Jedi. He turns out to be the linchpin in it. And so I thought the symbolism in that, you know, maybe that's not there. I don't know. But I do like the idea that that's what's going on in the Clone Wars, is he is just walking his path to becoming the galaxy's nightmare. I think that's super cool.
Some things in stories are coincidental, but they're really good, right? So even if it wasn't their intention, I think that's a really cool element you can pull out of it, is that I mean, how often do you see Anakin just in that march with the clone troopers, just moving forward, pushing it forward? And he is like that path ultimately, all that war, all that fighting, all that, you know, exchange and argument with the council and what's right. And because in the Clone Wars, we see Anakin really act out pretty aggressively at times and take matters into his own hands in ways that, you know, there's a few times where Obi-Wan's like, whoa, like, what are we doing here?
He's like force choking people.
Where they're like interrogating that guy. So
is it Wat Tambor that he get or something like that? Who does he end up?
Remember?
Yeah, no, it's not Wat Tambor. That's later on. That's in Revenge of the Sith. He gets him, but he. some shady things happening, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's cool. And
it is
then
cool. I hadn't thought about that, but that makes sense.
And like later on, obviously, we'll see that in a minute, but like he's pressing in as Vader, and that's very much like a lesson for Ahsoka at that point.
Yeah, there's a really cool difference.
Yeah.
There's a really cool difference between this flash and the next one that we get.
Yeah. So we pick up here. We pick up on Mandalore, and I love that Anakin is just looking around, like he's like, "Oh, what's going on here?" Like, watch him looking here, looking around.
This was the siege of Mandalore. We had parted ways by now.
Looks intense.
It was.
That's very nice, right? Like, this is the Siege of Mandalore. We had parted ways by now. He clearly doesn't recall it. And when you put it all together, that this is how old Ahsoka was when she was fighting Darth Maul and beating him on Mandalore, kind of crazy, too.
Yeah. And I think it's very Anakin, because as smart and capable as he was really ignorant sometimes and really blind to things. And so I think it fits him. And I don't think he's messing with her. I think he really doesn't understand. I think he's there to help her and get past this thing, but I don't think he quite understands yet what it is at the core of what's holding her back.
Yep.
And so the way he just treats everything so nonchalantly is like, hey, yeah, you did a good job here. And she's sitting here like, I felt like we were cut off. Like, this was the end of our relationship. Like, she's kind of morose about it. And he's just like, yeah, you did good. And so I feel like that's very Anakin, just to not pick up on that, and be oblivious to it.
Well, I think it's just the way he got. Again, it is Anakin, but like the way he got into the war was like, we're just fighting, right? Like we're getting after it, and she's got all of these, actual like reservations and thoughts, and seeing the intellectual side of the fighting as where he's just head on, like, hey, let's take care of what's in front of us. And so that's what you get in this scene right here is like, hey, looks like you took care of what was in front of you. But if you watch the next few episodes of the Clone Wars, this is the downfall of everything Ahsoka was. That's a tearjerker at the end of that arc of the Clone Wars.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Now this little back and forth between Anakin and Ahsoka, this is probably my favorite part of the episode. I don't know about you, but this is when he's like, oh, is this what this is about? I love it.
But you're more than that. Because I'm more than that.
You are more, Anakin. But more powerful and dangerous than anyone realized.
That is, she just tells him what's up, because it's almost as if, I mean, he's aware of the Vader, right? Like he knows he was Vader. He had just talked about it, like, oh, I've heard that before. And then he's like, no, you're more than that because I'm more than it. And I think he meant that in a positive light. And she's like, oh no, you were more. Do you remember when you ruined the whole galaxy? Like, yeah, you were definitely, you were definitely more. And that's what she brings up. And that's kind of when we were like, okay, so now they're going to bring up what happened. Yeah. Because we were wondering if that was going to happen.
And I like that interaction, because right before she's talking about, she's like, all I know how to train me to do. And then he says, well, yeah, you're a warrior, but that's when he's like, you're more than that. And I like that he says, like, I'm more than that too, because Anakin was one of the most misunderstood people in the Jedi Order. And he ultimately became labeled, this traitor and this evil, awful villain, rightfully so. But it seems like he has in some manner come to terms with that, where he's able to have this perspective of, we're not necessarily just what we've done or what we've been, and trying to get her to see, like, yeah, you're a warrior. You're going to continue to be a warrior, but you can still be other things too. Like that doesn't have to be the only thing you are. But she's still not quite there yet. So.
She's still pretty mad about the Vader thing, apparently.
Like, I mean, that's fair. I think
not let go of that yet.
That's valid.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean,
especially since last
wasn't great
killer. So
yeah. Now this, I love his like defensiveness to that question.
Is that what this is about?
If I am everything you are,
You've learned nothing.
don't say that.
You've learned nothing. It's like, is that what this is about? As if it's no small thing that, oh, by the way, you did turn bad and you killed most of the Jedi, and you really made the galaxy a bad place for like decades. And he's like, oh, is that what this is about? Like, it's just another little thing.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I think he's frustrated because I think if you go back and look at the Clone Wars, he's always trying to teach her to think, right, and to look at things beyond just the surface level. And so it's almost just like, like this is literally what I've been trying to get you to do, like think, like you're still stuck on this one thing.
Yep.
But yeah, he totally brushes it off as like this so inconsequential thing. Which it's pretty funny in the moment.
I do think it's an interesting take, though, where he thinks it's inconsequential. Like, is that more into this being that he is now? Like, he just sees his very short lifespan as just it was kind of a thing, there's some good and some bad there, highs and lows, but you see it in like this big ebb and flow of the Force. And does he just kind of view it as like a couple decades off, and then now like things are back on its path to right? Like he has this big picture view. I doubt that's what they're getting at here, but it does give perspective to things, right? Because that is just a couple decades. That's not a lot of time in the grand scheme of history, of any type of history. So maybe he does have that more, big picture view there in this version of Anakin we see.
It could be, but I also think it's. I don't think necessarily he views what he did as inconsequential, but I think he's not. I think this is him realizing that this is what she's hung up on. That, obviously he knows he did bad stuff and became this awful person, but this is where the source of her fear is in terms of moving on. It's this thing that he became. He's like, oh, that's what it is. It's me. Like, I figured you were just hung up on something else. So I think part of it may not be that it's nothing to him, but I think he is a little bit surprised. Maybe he never understood how important he was to her. And so maybe it does take him a little off guard that he is the reason that she's having a hard time moving on. I don't know.
Yeah.
Either way, it's really interesting.
Well, I was going to say, what about the number one rule of time travel here? Because you always kind of equate time travel to the world between worlds. And the number one rule is everything that happened, like it has to go that way, So what if he looks back at all this and he was like, no, the way everything went, it's terrible, but that's the way it actually had to go. Like all of those things had to happen to get to the point. Like that version of the Jedi did need to end. Now, obviously, it wasn't a good way. And then this whole thing had to happen for Palpatine to ultimately be able to even be beaten. Like, what if he sees it that way? That's an interesting take on that as well.
There's some elements of that in some of the legend stuff with Jason Solo, where after he goes evil and becomes this new Sith Lord, where Luke talks to him afterwards, after he's dead. And they kind of have this exchange where Jason Solo's kind of like, well, there's peace now though. Like you could argue that everything I did was wrong, but there's peace now. And so it did kind of have this element of like what I did actually did create something good. And so, I mean, of course that brings up something that's probably not very George Lucas, that there's a purpose to the dark side, right? Like, I don't think he would agree with that. But it's interesting though. It's an interesting perspective.
Yeah, and George is big into choices too. Like Anakin did have that choice to come back. So yeah, you're probably right. But I do think it's interesting if he takes that look on things. Like, no, everything happened the way it was supposed to. And Ahsoka kind of gives that answer at the end of the series, where she's like, Ezra's right where he needs to be. We're right where we need to be. So it does give a little bit to that.
Yeah.
But then you get this cool scene. You just keep getting lots of cool shots in this episode. And I don't think we ever expected to see Anakin with a red saber, but here it is. That music changes.
Yeah.
Incorrect.
So good. So good. And I mean, those Sith eyes. And so she's hung up on the fact that, he did become Vader. And he goes, all right, this is your problem. Time to face it head on. Just the way Anakin would. Like, you got to face your problems head on. And so he turns into Sith Vader, yellow eyes. I mean, man, just so good.
Yeah, and it makes you kind of think back to his like training when he's training her with the clone troopers and just how aggressive it is. Like
Yeah.
it's so very direct and to the point. It's like, no, you're going to fight all of these guys until you figure out how to stand your ground. And so we kind of see the same thing is where it's like, all right, well, if you got to deal with Vader, you're going to deal with Vader. Here he is.
Yeah.
That is good. And then he again shows that he has some control over this place. Like he kicks
Yeah.
of this dream place, which is interesting.
Yeah, I think it's so cool when that little scene happens. Let's go ahead and skip forward to that, because to me, like when people talk about the Luke Skywalker, like we just talked last week about his return, and it's like the most iconic scene in Star Wars since, Disney purchased it. For me, this could be the most iconic.
It's a pretty good shot.
Iconic scene for me. And I mean, when it's like that dun 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 beat, it's so good. Hear Vader breathing.
You lack conviction.
You lack conviction, and it's Anakin and Vader talking. How good is that?
Yeah, and
so
kind of we were talking about earlier. This shot's so different because the first shot's kind of like in her head, her vision of Anakin, faltering into this Vader thing, and this is just him, like you said, kind of pressing, like going full into it, and it's Vader advancing. It's a little difference, but it's really cool. It just feels so different.
I was gonna say, just look how aggressive he is to him. You can just see his face in this little shot. I mean, Hayden Christensen, it's been like 20 years, and he did not skip a beat on any of this.
Yeah.
So good. Dodges her. I mean, man, that's just awesome. Watching him get to do that again. I mean, if anything else, outside of getting to see Anakin, getting to watch Hayden Christensen play with a lightsaber again and get to be that kind of Anakin, I think that's super fun too. Let's see here. Skip ahead to the end of this.
Happened.
No, you cut out for a minute, but you're back now.
Has it been doing that?
Periodically, but I think you're good.
What's going on? Okay.
But we get here to the end of this, and what you get, and I thought I'm still not quite sure I fully understand this little scene where like Ahsoka has the yellow eyes and hisses at him too. It's pretty neat to watch, but like, check out this move. How smooth was that? Got those Sith eyes.
Yeah.
And then she kind of like gives it right back to him here.
Yeah.
And like, is that just because I thought it was just her lightsaber at first, but then it changes back pretty quick. Like she's like, no, I've got the yellow eyes too. So I still don't know that I quite understand that, but it's a really cool scene.
It is. I mean, I think it goes back into that moment of like, Anakin gave into his fear, right? He became Vader. And so at this moment, like when confronted with what she's absolutely terrified of, like, is she going to give into that and cut him down in an act of anger and, fall in the same way he did? Or is she going to, not let this thing rule her, right? Because that was Anakin's thing, is he let a fear of what could happen rule him. He could have chosen to see what happened and find other ways and seek help from others, but that fear was so great. So I don't know, to me it's like Ahsoka's right in this moment, she's facing that fear of what it is that's holding her back.
Yeah, and she backs off that ledge, which is cool. That's exactly, he pushes her, and I don't know if it's intentional on his part or if she just has to make that decision, but he pushes her to that breaking point. And then she has to reach it and back off. Like, does he know her limitations because he's the chosen one? He knows exactly what she needs, and he's like the perfect teacher at this point. Like, as he just keeps goading her and goading her and goading her to get to that point. And then at the end, he's like, you may have a chance after all. Like that's the message he gives her. Like she walks up to the ledge, backs off of it, and she's like, I choose to live. And he's like, well, you might have a chance, and that's like a very arrogant Anakin thing too. Like he's telling her, like,
is.
you've got this, like
Yeah.
you've got it. But he can't just say that. He has to say, well, you may just have a chance at this. So I think this episode does a couple of things. It gives us the Anakin that we were like, man, who thought we would have got to see that? It gives you a mature Anakin, kind of like the mature teacher Anakin that we never expected to see live action. Gives us Vader, and it shows you an Anakin ruling both sides of Anakin, right? Like all of Anakin, powerful light, powerful darkness, perfect balance. Like if you want to talk about bringing balance to the Force, he balances Vader and Anakin in the same, arena to teach the lesson that he needs to teach. And so like he's got the full grasp of this light and dark to push forward what he needs to push forward. And I almost do think that's like this whole chosen one thing. I love the idea that he can just, all of the Force, good, bad, in between, he can use it for good ultimately. And I think that's a cool thing. Like you said, George may not be crazy about that idea, but it works. I like it.
Yeah, it's fun. Yeah, because really,
yeah, for sure.
Dark side, it controls you, right? Like you're kind of at the mercy of all that stuff that comes from pursuing the dark side. And so Anakin shows that he's not at the mercy of it anymore, but he really does kind of move into that figure and that person at will without consequence, right? Like he just goes right back when he's done
smooth.
with
it. Yeah, super smooth. I think wrapping this up, if you could like talk about this episode, any one given thing about it, I think you just put yourself back into, say it's 2005. You've just watched Revenge of the Sith. You've watched the story wrap up and you're like, okay, we're not going to see Mark Hamill on screen anymore as Luke. Anakin just wrapped his portion up. He's Vader now. He's crispy. Like we're not going to see Hayden Christensen as Anakin anymore. That's over. Jump ahead, 18 years? And you get to see Hayden Christensen on screen again as Anakin, which I know we saw in the Obi-Wan show as well, so maybe 17 years. But, like, you get that Anakin after all this time, after, he's been talked poorly, Hayden Christensen has, the internet roasted him over that. He retires and goes to a farm, and then, like, Star Wars still loves him. Like, all of us that grew up with it, we still love that Anakin Skywalker, and he gets to come back and have his roses. How great is that?
Yeah, it's super satisfying because it's just to get more than just like he shows up for a moment, right? Or we see the Force Ghost at the end, which I think that may have been kind of in line of what maybe we all expected, but to get like a full fleshed out return
episode,
where he gets to interact with this character that was so monumental in the past several years with the Clone Wars and then into Rebels, and to get to see them come back together for this moment. Like I think that was way more than any of us were anticipating from that return. So
no, I agree. For me, personally, if we never saw Anakin on screen again, I think this gives the closure that we as fans, like a good satisfying wrap up to his story, right? It didn't need much, but it does give you that whole wrap up. He got to finish that story with Ahsoka. And then even with the Force Ghost at the end, like the little nod of approval. Honestly, I think that's a cherry on top for Anakin. Now, are they going to put him on more stuff? Sure. And I'm all here for it. But it's pretty crazy that you can wrap up a story that big for him in a satisfying way in that short of an amount of time. Like it shows how well it was written, first of all, just in what it was, right?
That's
1 through 6, that there's only like this little piece that we still kind of need to see wrapped up, and then we get it. So for me, this episode's a 10 out of 10 when it comes to Star Wars TV series, and that's what we're doing. We're talking about the best episodes in Star Wars TV series. Mainly, we kind of just focused on Anakin here, but this episode was Anakin. I mean, that's what it was. It was
pretty much the core was
the
him
curtain
Ahsoka.
call.
That was it. Yeah.
So it was so good. And man, just getting to see Hayden do like different cons and celebration and interviews and stuff like that, like just how beloved he is now in Star Wars. And I think this episode just kind of encapsulates that. Like he's the chosen one. He comes back and we're all here for it. Yep. So that's pretty awesome. Now, next week, we're going to keep this whole Anakin Skywalker train rolling. Kevin will not be here for this next week, but we've got 2 special guests hopping on. So I'll leave that as a surprise, kind of a cliffhanger for next week's episode. And if either one of them decides to drop out, I'm not on the record for saying that they were coming, but we are going to talk the Kenobi finale. Now, we are going to only talk about the Kenobi-Vader duel. Not going to be much Reva talk there. But we're just going to talk about that Anakin and Obi-Wan duel, which I think is another top-notch scene that Disney Star Wars has put on. So, super excited for that. Super excited to rewatch it. And then Kevin and I will be back at it again the next week. Maybe talk a little bit of Star Wars Rebels, maybe some Jedi Knight, if you will.
Oh man,
are we ready for that? I think we are. So thank you guys for watching. Let us know what you thought about this Shadow Warrior episode in the comments, and we'll catch you next time.